Alright, so some interesting thoughts that crossed my mind today. I was thinking about, often like self-harm is a form of revenge, and like, I've heard that, people who decide to take their own lives often, there's some motive of vengeance about it. And so I was, thinking on a different sort of subject. What is, I think, behind a lot of drug addiction has something to do with revenge. Because like, what better way to, it's even better in a lot of ways to inflict suffering on, like your parents, for example. It's usually probably going to be your parents, maybe a spouse or something. But I think, a lot of children who get addicted to drugs, I think there is like a vengeance motive here. I'm just speculating, but I thought, it's an interesting sort of thing to consider. And so, because, for example, if you have a very, a religious father who wants to, he has this very rigid structure in his life and his family, and he wants everything to be in order. He wants everything to be under his control. And a lot of it has to do with, compensating, for his own insecurity. And there's not a whole lot of, emotional conversations, between the family members, because the father is sort of like emotionally cold, and he doesn't value that kind of intimacy, because the life that he has is a life of wanting to present an image to fit into a community, so that he can feel like, I am a good member of society. I am conscientious, I'm hardworking, I'm respectable, and my family is respectable, and they do, there's a hierarchy, there's a structure, I'm the leader, they do what I tell them, and we're good members of the community. So, the child that feels very stifled by this, and wants to rebel, and, perhaps there's some abuse that took place that was swept under the rug and not talked about, and there's no consolation made or conversation. It's just, the child sort of had to suffer it in silence. And the whole, structure, I think any like emotionally suffocating household where, the purpose of the family is just to prop up some image of the patriarch, or, the matriarch in some cases, or it's interchangeable, really. You can have both parents be equally rigidly, sort of fucked up in this, falsely moralistic, virtue that is, not really virtue. But anyhow, yeah, I think a child that gets addicted to drugs, what a great way to hit your parents on so many different levels of, first there's the humiliation. My child is doing something that is considered taboo by society. Then there is, my child is doing something that is very difficult for me to control. So it like takes away the control of the controlling parent. Then there is now I'm forced to feel emotions that I don't want to feel. I'm feeling angry. And anger, I don't like my anger being out of my control, because now I'm feeling my child is more in control of like how and when I feel angry, because now I'm like, because my kid is on drugs, like I'm angry about it, but I don't want to, show my feelings to the world. And so now I have to push down my anger even more. And I was probably pushing down a lot of feelings before that. And so now like that level of emotional control is challenged. And then, there's like, oh shit, I actually love my child. And now I'm having to, now there's also the stain on, now there's also the stain of how I feel like I failed as a parent, that my child is destroying their lives, with drugs. And, I can't do anything except watch, and I can get angry at them, and I can like try to force them to be different, but like, quickly the parent will realize that they don't have much control in this area, at least not in a hard way. There's not much they can do with their old method of, control and, wanting to do some kind of, thinking that like, giving orders, I order you to stop taking drugs, it's like, I mean, that's what got them on the drugs in the first place, at least partially. I'm not saying it's all the responsibility of the parent. We all make our own choices, but we all have to also take responsibility for how we influence people. But so, yeah, and then there's like, and then there's the humiliation of like, it's obvious that a parent who wanted to have this family for the, sort of like a postcard family sort of thing, that it's going to be humiliating for them that, their kids are now dysfunctional drug addicts, and they can't, they can't have the postcard family. And people now, like they know that people will be talking about them behind their back. People will probably be talking about how, this father and his son, and how his son is now, a drug addict, and probably like, well, what did that father do to fuck up his kids, So, yeah, and then it's just, it's a lot of very, it just hits the, it hits the parent in so many different ways. It's like, there's the actual emotional feelings of attachment to a child, and, watching a child suffer, and then, also, like being challenged, it's the child is sort of challenging the parent. It's like, okay, how much do you actually love me? Can you like put, like, what are you going to do for me? How are you going to help me now? Am I actually able to, maybe I can get something real from you, because it's like, I think a lot of children in this world, not just drug addicts, they're sort of suffering because the parents don't give them anything real, of emotions, nothing real emotionally. Everything is just like some contrived, systematic, emotionally cold thing about, having to like always toe the party line, essentially. And, it's like, so when the child sort of pulls the rug out from their parents by getting addicted to drugs, it sort of it makes it harder for the parent to not show some emotions about it. And so, it's probably going to bring up a lot of fights and a lot of conflict. But in some ways, the child would probably prefer that than this like emotionally cold environment that it grew up in. And like now, in a sense, they are more in control of what the fight is about. Like the parent can't just like attack the child on their terms and their values. The child has now chosen the battleground. The battleground is, I'm addicted to drugs, nana, you can't do anything about it, fuck you. And I'm gonna keep doing it until I'm fucking done doing it. So yeah, and it's just, and then it's just horrible to, when you love somebody and you're watching them slowly wither away and die because of something that is completely preventable, and it's self-harm that is self-inflicted, and that is, and I would think any parent, even if they were like some rigid bastard, they're gonna have like feelings about like, oh my God, like I love my kid, like how do I let my kid know that I love them, but I'm so, have all these other feelings, and I'm so ashamed, I'm so embarrassed, I feel like there's nothing I can do, and now I'm just watching them slowly die. And it's a difficult thing, so yeah, so just some interesting thoughts about why I thought perhaps revenge is like perhaps a common motive for people to stay addicted to drugs. And I think maybe like examining the reasons why we do the things we do can sometimes help us make better choices, even if it it's not always so easy. It's like there's a lot of like emotions that we have to train to function a little bit differently, because when we go to change, we're gonna feel like those same challenges, and they're gonna be sort of left where we left them, and then we have to kind of pick up where we left off, and then it can be overwhelming to try to change, and it can feel like death. It can feel like literal death. Doing the right thing can sometimes feel like absolutely the wrong thing that is going to get you killed. It can feel as frightening as like jumping off of a tall building or a tall bridge. And it feels sort of like in order to save your life, you have to do something that makes you afraid that your life is going to be over. So it's a weird sort of place to be, that you kind of have to master your own fear of death in a way so that you can prevent your actual death. But it's hard to tell the difference. What is real death and what is actual death? What feelings do I have to confront that are going to make me feel like I'm going to die if I do that? And is that something that is ultimately going to lead to a better, more healthy life if I stay strong and move forward, even in the face of everything falling apart, or it feels like everything is falling apart inside of me and around me. So anyhow, some interesting thoughts. At least they were interesting to me. Y'all have a good one.